There's one map that explains everything, one image that shows you exactly why governments around the world are in panic mode right now, one simple geographic reality that the financial media talks around but never shows you clearly, because showing it clearly would reveal how fragile the entire global economy actually is. This map right here, the one showing global oil shipping routes, the red lines representing 100 million barrels of oil moving across oceans every single day. The narrow passages where those red lines converge into single threads, the choke points where the entire energy supply of the modern world squeezes through gaps so small you could almost swim across them. 4 choke points. That's it. 4 geographic bottlenecks control the flow of energy that powers civilization, and right now, 3 of them are either under direct threat, actively contested, or controlled by nations hostile to American interests. The Strait of Hormuz, 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, 21 million barrels of oil per day passing through, 21% of global petroleum consumption flowing through a waterway you can see across on a clear day. The Suez Canal, 673 feet wide, 12% of global trade passing through a man-made ditch that a single cargo ship blocked for 6 days in 2021, costing the global economy $9.6 billion. The Bab-el-Mandeb Strait, 18 ME wide. The southern entrance to the Red Sea, the passage that Houthi forces have been attacking for months, forcing global shipping to reroute around the entire African continent. The Strait of Malacca, 1.7 mi wide at its narrowest, the passage between Malaysia and Indonesia that connects the Indian Ocean to the Pacific, 16 million barrels of oil per day flowing to China, Japan, and South Korea. 4 choke points combined, they handle over 60% of global oil shipping, and every single one of them can be disrupted by a single missile, a single mine, a single act of military aggression. The map doesn't lie. The geography is permanent, and the panic you're seeing in global markets right now exists because people who understand this map have looked at the current threat environment and calculated something terrifying. Within 72 hours, one or more of these choke points could close. And when they close, oil doesn't spike 10%. Oil doesn't spike 20%. Oil goes somewhere that breaks the global economy. That's what this map shows. That's what the panic is about. And that's what nobody will explain to you clearly, because explaining it clearly means admitting how vulnerable everything actually is. Here's what the map actually reveals when you understand how oil moves around the world. Oil doesn't appear at your gas station by magic. It travels thousands of miles across oceans on ships that take weeks to complete their journeys. And those ships, no matter where they're going, must pass through the choke points that geography created millions of years ago. Let's trace the routes. Saudi Arabia produces 9.5 million barrels of oil per day. That oil loads onto tankers at Ras Tanura and other terminals on the Persian Gulf Coast. Those tankers have exactly one way to reach the open ocean through the Strait of Hormuz. There is no alternative. There is no other route. Every single barrel of Saudi oil exported by sea passes through that 21-mile gap. The same is true for Kuwait, 2.7 million barrels per day through the strait. The same is true for the UAE, 3.2 million barrels per day through the strait. The same is true for Iraq, 4.4 million barrels per day through the strait. The same is true for Qatar, the world's largest LNG exporter. Every cubic meter of natural gas through the strait. Combined, these nations produce over 20 million barrels of oil per day and supply 30% of global LNG. All of it funnels through a waterway that Iran controls one shore of. All of it passes within range of Iranian missiles, Iranian fast attack boats, Iranian naval mines. Now trace what happens after the strait. Oil heading to Europe and America doesn't cross the Pacific. It goes through the Red Sea, through the Suez Canal, into the Mediterranean. That path requires transiting the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait at the southern end of the Red Sea, the strait that Houthi forces have been attacking with missiles and drones for months. Since November, over 70 commercial vessels have been struck or targeted in the Bab-el-Mandeb and southern Red Sea. Insurance premiums for Red Sea transit have increased 300%. Major shipping companies including Mars, MSC, and Hapag-Lloyd have suspended Red Sea operations entirely. The oil that was supposed to go through Suez is now routing around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa. That adds 3,000 to 4,000 nautical miles to the journey. That adds 10 to 14 days of transit time. That means oil that left the Persian Gulf 3 weeks ago still hasn't reached European refineries. Look at the map again. The choke points aren't spread randomly. They're clustered in one of the most unstable regions on Earth. The Middle East, the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, the areas where American forces are concentrated, the areas where Iranian proxies are active, the areas where a regional war is currently being fought. The geographic vulnerability isn't theoretical. It's being exploited right now. The shipping disruptions aren't hypothetical. They're happening right now. The 72-hour spike isn't a distant possibility. The conditions for it are present right now. But the current shipping disruptions, as serious as they are, aren't even the most alarming element of what this map reveals. Because there's a scenario being war-aimed in capitals around the world right now that doesn't involve disrupting one choke point. It involves closing all of them simultaneously. Let me explain why that scenario is now being taken seriously. Iran has alliances, not casual diplomatic relationships, military alliances with armed forces positioned at multiple choke points simultaneously. The Houthis control the Bab-el-Mandeb approaches. They've already demonstrated the capability and willingness to attack commercial shipping. They've already closed the Red Sea route for major carriers. They're aligned with Iran and coordinate operations with Iranian military advisors. Hezbollah controls significant territory in Lebanon and has demonstrated the ability to strike targets throughout the eastern Mediterranean. The Mediterranean sea lanes that carry oil from Suez to European ports pass within range of Hezbollah's missile systems. Iranian naval forces control the northern shore of the Strait of Hormuz directly. They've conducted exercises mining the strait. They've practiced swarming attacks against tanker traffic. They've positioned anti-H-ship missiles along the coastline with overlapping coverage of all transit lanes. Now look at the map with this alliance structure overlaid. A single order from Thrawn could activate attacks at Hormuz, Bab-el-Mandeb, and the eastern Mediterranean simultaneously. 3 of the 4 critical choke points, over 50% of global oil shipping, attacked at the same moment by forces that have already demonstrated both capability and intent. The 4th choke point, the Strait of Malacca, isn't controlled by Iranian allies. But it doesn't need to be because the oil that flows through Malacca comes from the same Persian Gulf terminals that flow through Hormuz. Close Hormuz and there's no oil to flow through Malacca. The source dries up. Here's the 72-hour timeline that explains the panic. Hour 0. Coordinated attacks begin at Hormuz and Bab-el-Mandeb simultaneously. Tankers are struck. Mines are detected or suspected. Shipping companies halt all transit. Hour 1 to hour 6. Oil futures spike 40% to 60% as markets price in the supply disruption. Circuit breakers trigger on commodity exchanges. Governments convene emergency sessions. Hour 6 to hour 24. Insurance companies declare war risk clauses active, invalidating coverage for any vessel attempting transit. Even ships that could physically pass through cannot legally proceed because their insurance is void. Hour 24 to hour 48, strategic petroleum reserves begin releasing in the United States, Europe, Japan, and China. Combined reserve capacity approximately 1.5 billion barrels. Combined global consumption 100 million barrels per day. That's 15 days of coverage if every nation releases at maximum rates. 15 days. Hour 48 to hour 72. Markets realize that reserves cannot sustain global consumption indefinitely. Oil prices don't reflect current supply. They reflect expectations of future supply. Expectations of prolonged closure drive prices to levels that crash the global economy. $150 per barrel. That's where analysts were projecting 2 days ago. $200 per barrel. That's where revised models show prices reaching if closure extends beyond 1 week. $300 per barrel. That's where some scenarios show prices if the conflict expands to include destruction of production facilities, not just transit disruption. The map shows you why the choke points are too few. The alternatives are too limited. The geographic reality cannot be changed by policy or diplomacy. Let's talk about what's already happening in response to this map, because governments and corporations that understand the vulnerability are already positioning. China has been stockpiling oil for 18 months at rates that exceed any historical precedent. Official Chinese reserves are classified, but satellite analysis of storage facility capacity suggests China has accumulated between 950 million and 1.2 billion barrels. That's 3 to 4 months of coverage at China's consumption rates. China reads the same map you're looking at now, China sees that its oil supply flows through both Hormuz and Malacca. China has concluded that depending on choke points controlled by others is strategically unacceptable. China is preparing for the scenario where those choke points close. Japan has begun emergency consultations with the United States about supply guarantees. Japan imports 97% of its oil. Nearly all of it passes through both Hormuz and Malacca. Japan's strategic reserves provide approximately 180 days of coverage. But Japan is a manufacturing economy. Reserves keep cars running and homes heated. They don't keep factories operating at capacity. Japan's industrial economy begins contracting immediately when supply confidence falls. India has activated emergency energy protocols for the first time since 1973. India imports 85% of its oil predominantly from Gulf producers through Hormuz. Indian refineries are already reporting stock drawdowns as forward purchasing has become increasingly expensive and uncertain. Europe is in crisis mode. The European Union has called emergency energy ministerial meetings in Brussels. Germany, which still relies on oil for transportation and heating, has begun reviewing rationing protocols developed during the Cold War but never implemented. France has activated its Strategic Reserve Coordination Mechanism. The UK has placed North Sea production assets on heightened status. Meanwhile, commodity traders are positioning in ways that reveal what sophisticated money expects. Call options on oil futures at $150, $175s, and $200 strike prices have seen volume increase 3,400% in the last 10 days. Tanker rates have spiked 280% since the Red Sea disruptions began. Companies that own oil tankers are making more profit from the supply chain breakdown than oil companies are making from the oil itself. And look at what defense contractors are experiencing. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop, Grumman stock prices up 15% to 22% since the choke point threats intensified. The market is pricing in expanded military operations to protect shipping lanes. Expanded military operations mean expanded weapons purchases. The map that shows vulnerability also shows opportunity for companies that sell protection. Here's what's happening at gas stations right now, even before any choke point fully closes. The national average gas price has increased 0.47 in the last 3 weeks. That's the anticipation premium. Oil hasn't been cut off. Tankers are still moving, just on longer routes. But markets price expectations, not current conditions. The expectation of disruption is already in your gas price. Your heating oil, if you use it, has increased 23% since October. Your airline tickets have fuel surcharges that didn't exist 6 months ago. Your grocery prices, which depend on diesel trucks moving products across the country, have increased for 14 consecutive months. The crisis isn't coming. The crisis is already here in slow motion. The 72-hour spike is the acceleration, the conversion from gradual squeeze to sudden shock. Let's be honest about why this geographic vulnerability exists, and why nothing has been done to fix it. The global economy chose efficiency over resilience. For 50 years, the driving principle of global supply chains has been cost minimization. Build factories where labor is cheapest, ship products where shipping is cheapest, source energy from where extraction is cheapest. The entire system was optimized for a world where nothing ever goes wrong. The choke points weren't a concern because the Cold War provided stability. The American Navy guaranteed freedom of navigation. Regional powers were deterred by overwhelming force. The assumption was that markets could rely on military protection without ever paying the full cost of that protection. That assumption was always fragile. Now it's breaking. Iran has developed capabilities that the American Navy cannot neutralize without unacceptable risk. Hypersonic missiles that carriers cannot reliably intercept, mines that take weeks to clear, drone swarms that overwhelm defensive systems. The naval dominance that guaranteed the choke points is no longer guaranteed, and here's the strategic reality that makes this map permanent. You cannot build around geography. Pipelines can bypass some choke points, but pipelines have limited capacity and take decades to construct. Russia's pipelines to Europe were supposed to provide alternative supply, and Europe chose to shut them down over Ukraine. China's overland routes from Central Asia provide some buffer but cannot replace maritime supply at scale. The choke points exist because the land masses surrounding them exist. Africa is where Africa is. The Arabian Peninsula is where it is. Indonesia and Malaysia are where they are. No amount of investment changes the physical geography of the planet. The solutions that exist are all inadequate. Strategic reserves, 90 days of coverage combined across all major economies. That's survival, not stability. That's rationing, not normal economic function. Alternative energy growing but still providing less than 15% of global transportation fuel. Electric vehicles exist, but the fleet turnover to replace internal combustion engines takes 15 to 20 years. Domestic production. The United States produces 13 million barrels per day, making it the world's largest producer. But American refineries are configured for imported crude blends. Domestic production alone cannot supply domestic consumption at current refinery configurations. Every solution requires time. The choke points can close in hours. The gap between problem and solution is measured in decades. The crisis is measured in days. Here's what the map ultimately reveals. The prosperity of the developed world depends on narrow waterways controlled by unstable nations, protected by military forces, facing unprecedented challenges, and immune to any technological fix that could be implemented in relevant timeframes. The panic is justified. The vulnerability is real. The 72-hour timeline is not alarmist. It's the honest assessment of what happens when geography meets geopolitics in a world that assumed geography no longer mattered. So let's be absolutely clear about what this map shows and what the next 72 hours could bring. 4 choke points control over 60% of global oil shipping. The Strait of Hormuz, 21 million barrels per day. The Suez Canal, 12% of global trade. The Bab-el-Mandeb Strait already under attack by Houthi forces. The Strait of Malacca, 16 million barrels per day to Asia. 3 of these 4 choke points are currently threatened, contested, or within range of hostile forces aligned with Iran. Coordinated closure is not hypothetical. The military capability exists. The alliance structure exists. The intent has been demonstrated. The 72-hour timeline moves from attack to insurance cancellation to reserve release to price explosion. Each stage is documented in contingency planning across every major economy. This is not speculation. These are the scenarios that governments are actively preparing for. China has stockpiled over 1 billion barrels of oil. Japan is seeking emergency supply guarantees. India has activated protocols unused for 50 years. Europe is reviewing rationing procedures. The sophisticated actors have read this map and drawn conclusions. Oil prices have already begun responding. Gas prices at your local station have increased 0.47 in 3 weeks on anticipation alone. Tanker rates are up 280%. Defense stocks are up 22%. The market sees what's coming, and the geographic reality cannot be changed. No pipeline bypasses all choke points. No alternative energy source scales fast enough. No domestic production configuration eliminates import dependence. The vulnerability is built into the physical planet. The map shows 4 bottlenecks where 100 million barrels of daily oil flow compress into passages measured in miles or hundreds of feet. It shows how military forces can close those passages. It shows how closure cascades through global energy supply. It shows why governments are panicking. You're looking at the most important image in geopolitics right now, the image that explains oil prices, the image that explains military deployments, the image that explains why the next 72 hours could determine global economic stability for the next decade. The lines on this map represent the energy that heats your home, powers your car, transports your food, and manufactures everything you buy. Those lines pass through choke points that hostile forces are currently positioned to close. The panic isn't irrational. The panic is the recognition of vulnerability that has always existed, but is now being tested in real time. 72 hours, 4 choke points, 1 map. Pay attention to this image. Understand what it shows, because the next time you fill your gas tank, the price you pay will be determined by what happens at the narrow passages this map reveals. Geography is destiny, and destiny is closing.